Towards the end of the 3rd millennium BC, Gutian invaders, the first barbarians in history, swept down from their mountain fastnesses on the eastern fringes of the civilized Mesopotamian world to lay waste to the millennia-old city builders of Sumer, Akkad and Assyria. In the space of a single generation, the Gutians proceeded to conquer all of the previously all-powerful realms between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, launching Mesopotamia into its very first Dark Age. For over 100 years they ruled as illiterate warlords atop the governance of the first cities of the world, until they were finally driven back to the mountains by a resurgence of Sumerian nationalism amidst terrible famine and poverty. For all of these Neo-Sumerians' efforts in re-legitimizing themselves, the damage was already done. The cities of Sumer and Akkad had become complacent since their heydays, and now their images of superiority had been permanently broken. From then onwards, right up until the Renaissance some 4,000 years later, this pattern would remain the same, prosperous cities being overthrown by militaristic peoples on the fringes of society, who in time became civilized themselves, until they too were conquered by the next batch of invaders, ever lured in by the trappings and economies of settled society. From the south, the next group to invade after the Neo-Sumerians were the Amorites, the founders, or at least the expanders, of the city of Babylon, and for a time, the rulers of the old Assyrian Empire, a state which would go on to control a strong northern triangle, ever expanding outwards and falling back in on itself for the next 1500 years. In the far north, however, on the very fringe of the civilized world of city builders, came yet another wave of invaders from far beyond the Pale. Whereas Gutians and Amorites had at least had some form of contact with the city builders, interacting with them on occasion, mostly through trade, these newcomers were truly foreign. Speculation still rages as to where they had originally hailed from, but to the Mesopotamians, it must have seemed like it was beyond the edge of the earth. One by one, the mountain cities and towns of the Hurrians and the Hattians, rugged people who in some cases had bordered the north of Mesopotamia for time immemorial, were replaced or forced to adapt to this devastating new wave of foes. It took some time for these newcomers to fully establish themselves in the region, but eventually they did, usurping cities and towns from the Hurrians, the Hattians, and even Assyrians in a gradual creeping frontier, maybe not so visible and palpable to the people living through it, but nonetheless inexorable when viewed in terms of generations. As the years went by, it increasingly became apparent that these newcomers were here to stay. They just so happened to be the precursors to one of the greatest of all civilisations of the ancient world, a people who would dominate their corner of the world for centuries to come, and at times extend their influence far outside their traditional borders into Babylon, Assyria, and even Egypt. To the great displeasure of the other major players of the ancient world, the Hittites had arrived. At first, the Hittites amounted to little more than regional warlords presiding over a smattering of towns and fortresses in the highlands of northern Syria. In time, however, these warlords would eventually coalesce under the rule of the strongest contender, becoming at first a kingdom and later an empire. One of the earliest of these kings, and the first to make it into the history books, was a regional warlord named Anitta, the king of the Proto-Hittite state of Kussara. Kussara began life as a relatively obscure Bronze Age kingdom in Anatolia. Though apparently important in its day, it is mostly remembered now as the origin of the dynasty that would form the Old Hittite Kingdom. In around 1780 BC, the Kussaran king Pithana, along with his son Anitta, conquered the city of Kanesh, along with its important trade links. Though Kussara appears to have retained ceremonial importance, in the first instance of many capital relocations, the political focal point of the kingdom was moved to Kanesh. Upon inheriting his father's throne, Anitta launched straight into the next of many conquests. A coalition of kings native to the area seemed to have risen up against the Hittite newcomers. Chief amongst them seems to have been Husiva, the last king of Zalpowa, and the Hattic king of Hattusha, Piusti. After both of these kings, presumably along with their other allies, were defeated by the Hittites, Anitta not only destroyed their cities, but had a curse laid upon Hattusha in an attempt to stop anyone from ever inhabiting the place again. He also took the title of Great King. Hattusha remained abandoned and cursed for close to 2 centuries, until another Hittite king, Hattusili I, the author of the Anitta text, the oldest known text in the Hittite language, and the oldest known Indo-European text altogether, moved his capital from Nisa to Hattusha, thus beginning the long history of the Old Hittite Kingdom. Hattusili I is the earliest Hittite ruler for whom contemporary records have been found. In addition to the King of Hattusha, he also took the title Man of Kussara, in reference to the prehistoric capital and old home of the Hittites ruled over by Anitta.